The black void of space was no stranger to Seraphina Aldrich. She had been in its cold embrace long enough to know its secrets, the eerie silence, the moments when the stars seemed to blink out of existence, and the constant, nagging weight of humanity's survival hanging over her like a storm cloud. She stood in the command center of the vanguard, humanity's last surviving warship, its hull scarred from countless battles. The view outside the massive viewport was a swirling vortex of distant stars, their light dimmed by the shadow of war. "Commander Aldrich, reports coming in." A voice crackled from the comms. Lieutenant Riker's face appeared on the holoscreen, his features drawn tight with concern. "The Gorrath fleet is gathering at the edge of the Altiris sector." Seraphina's eyes narrowed. The Gorrath, a relentless alien empire that had been sweeping through human colonies like a plague, were on the move again. Every time they struck, they left only devastation in their wake. A constant threat that humanity had yet to fully understand or repel. She exhaled, pushing away the fatigue that had crept into her bones. The war had been going on for years, and there were days when the weight of it all felt unbearable. But she had no choice but to continue. For Earth. For the last of humanity. "Prepare the fleet," Seraphina commanded, her voice steady, but with an edge of urgency. "We can't afford to let them get any closer. I'll be in the war room in 5 minutes. Riker nodded sharply, his holographic image flickering out as he followed her orders. As the doors to the command center slid open, Seraphina moved toward the war room. Every step she took echoed in the cold silence of the vanguard. The war room was a steel-walled chamber, its surfaces covered with hollow projectors and tactical maps of the galaxy. The rest of the crew were already gathered, their faces grim as they awaited her arrival. They knew the stakes. It wasn't just another skirmish. This was different. The Gorrath were planning something, and Seraphina wasn't about to let them catch humanity off guard again. "Seraphina." Admiral Armitage greeted her with a somber nod, his silver hair contrasting sharply with his dark uniform. "We've intercepted encrypted messages from the Gorrath. They're moving towards the last human stronghold in the Vega system. If they succeed, it will be the final blow." Seraphina paused, her mind racing. The Vega system was humanity's last real defense. If it fell, there would be nowhere left to retreat to. The fight would be over. "Not if I can help it," she replied, her voice cold with resolve. She turned to the tactical display. "We'll launch a counteroffensive. Send the fleet to the Vega system. But this time, we won't meet them head-on. We'll hit them where it hurts, behind their lines." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but Seraphina's reputation for brilliant tactics was enough to convince them. They had been through too many battles to question her now. "Set course for Vega," she ordered, her fingers dancing across the console. "And tell the fleet to prepare for a multi-pronged assault. We'll draw them out, and when they least expect it, we'll strike." Seraphina stood still for a moment, letting the plan take shape in her mind. But there was something else. A sense of dread gnawed at her. The Gorrath weren't just a military threat, they were a symbol of humanity's extinction. Every victory, every battle won, felt like a temporary reprieve. "Commander Aldrich," Riker's voice returned, cutting through her thoughts. "We've received word from the ground. The Gorrath's advance is faster than anticipated. We'll have no choice but to engage them within the next 12 hours. Seraphina clenched her fists, her jaw tightening. Time was running out, but she couldn't allow herself to rush into battle blindly. They needed the element of surprise. "We'll make them regret underestimating us," she said, her eyes steely with determination. "Prepare the ships. I want full readiness. And send word to all fleet commanders. This isn't just about defending Vega. This is about showing the Gorrath that humanity isn't ready to fall. Not today, not ever." The Vanguard moved into position, its engines roaring as it accelerated through the void. Seraphina stood on the command deck, watching the stars streak past them as the fleet followed in formation. She could feel the tension mounting. "Incoming transmission," Riker said, his voice trembling slightly as he listened to the message. "It's a distress call from Vega." "Commander, it's bad." Seraphina's heart skipped a beat. She quickly made her way to the comms station. The image of a shaken officer filled the screen, his uniform torn and bloodied. "We've been betrayed, Commander," the officer gasped. "There's a mole among us. One of our own forces handed over the location of the last human stronghold to the Gorrath. The transmission cut off abruptly, static filling the silence of the room. Seraphina's breath caught in her throat. Betrayed. She had never imagined it would happen so soon, or that someone within her ranks would be the one to deliver the final blow. "Damn it!" she muttered under her breath, slamming her fist against the console. "We have to move now." But as the fleet prepared to engage, a dark realization settled over her. The battle that was about to unfold wouldn't be just a war for survival. It would be a test of everything she had fought for: trust, loyalty, and the very essence of humanity's will to survive. The first wave of Gorrath's ships tore through the darkness, their massive hulls glinting with menacing energy. Seraphina watched as the fleet rushed into position, her mind racing with the weight of the decision she had just made. But there was no turning back now. She stood tall at the helm, eyes fixed on the approaching enemy. "Launch the assault," Seraphina ordered, her voice sharp. "Let's show them what humanity can do." As the battle unfolded in front of her, the roar of weapons and the clash of ships filled the cold vacuum of space. The fight for Vega had begun, and Seraphina knew that no matter the cost, they could not afford to lose. The silence of space was shattered by the deafening roar of weapon fire. The Vanguard and its fleet emerged from hyperspace, descending upon the Vega system like a storm. Thousands of ships, each one a glimmering testament to humanity's fight for survival, lined up in formation, their weapons primed, ready to strike. Seraphina Aldrich stood at the helm, her fingers brushing the tactical console as she surveyed the battlefield. The Gorrath fleet loomed ahead, its size staggering. Gigantic warships, dark and menacing, sprawled across the galaxy like an invasive shadow, their weapons charged and ready for battle. "Commander," Riker's voice crackled from the comms, "the Gorrath have deployed biobombers. They're moving fast, too fast. We're going to be outmaneuvered if we don't act quickly." Seraphina's eyes narrowed as she reviewed the holographic projections of the battlefield. The biobombers, designed to wreak havoc on planetary ecosystems, were a new development in the Gorrath's arsenal. She could already see them darting toward the human ships, deadly weapons trailing behind them like a swarm of locusts. "Engage at once!" she barked. "Intercept the bombers. Take them out before they can strike." The fleet surged forward, energy shields flickering to life as weapons fired in rapid succession. The air inside the command deck buzzed with urgency. The battle was far from over, but already Seraphina could sense that something was off. The Gorrath were not only better equipped, they were organized, moving with an almost preternatural precision. As the first wave of bombers was destroyed, Riker's voice cut through the chaos again. "Commander, there's something else. We've intercepted another transmission. There's been a breach, one of our own ships has gone dark." A chill ran down Seraphina's spine. "Explain," she ordered, though she already suspected what he was about to say. "The ship was a critical part of our assault formation," Riker replied, his voice tight. "It's been sabotaged. The communications have been blocked, and they've gone silent." A cold fury flared in Seraphina's chest. Betrayal. It wasn't just a theoretical threat anymore, it was happening. Her eyes flicked to the tactical map, and she adjusted her strategy on the fly. "Focus on the breach," she ordered sharply. "We can't afford to lose another ship. Launch a containment squadron to board and secure it. Now." The crew snapped into action, their movements sharp and precise. Seraphina's mind worked faster than the battle unfolding around her. They were already facing overwhelming odds, outnumbered, outgunned, and now, fractured by treason. But she wouldn't back down. Not now, not when humanity's survival hung by a thread. Minutes later, Seraphina stood in the war room, her gaze fixed on the holographic display as it flickered with updates. The battle had escalated, and despite their best efforts, the Gorrath were making significant headway. Her fleet was under heavy fire. The biobombers had breached the outer lines, and enemy ships were closing in on the vanguard. The damage was mounting. "Commander Aldrich," Admiral Armitage said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We need to pull back. Our ships are taking heavy damage, and if we stay in this fight any longer, we risk total destruction." Seraphina's jaw clenched. She understood the need for retreat, but retreat wasn't in her nature. It never had been. Not when there was still a chance to fight back. "We're not retreating. Not yet." She glanced at Riker, his expression hardening in the face of adversity. "We still have the new technology, the weapon we secured. It's our only shot." Armitage hesitated. "But, Commander, the weapon is untested. We don't know what it could do, or worse, what it might cost." "I don't care," Seraphina snapped. "We need to use it now, or we lose everything." The room fell silent, the weight of her decision hanging in the air like a thick fog. The weapon was risky, experimental, and no one knew for sure what it could do. But it was their last hope. "Do it," Seraphina commanded, her voice steady despite the uncertainty clawing at her insides. Riker moved to the console, his fingers flying over the controls. "Activating now," he said. Back in space, the Vanguard surged forward, its engines roaring to life as the newly activated weapon came online. A brilliant beam of energy shot from the ship's core, cutting through the Gorrath fleet like a knife through butter. The initial blast was devastating, ships disintegrated in an instant, and the shockwaves sent smaller vessels scattering in all directions. The tide shifted in an instant. The Gorrath fleet reeled from the surprise assault, their coordination thrown into chaos. But Seraphina's relief was short-lived. "We've got a bigger problem," Riker said, his voice tight with disbelief. "That ship, the one that went dark, it's been reactivated. The one we thought was lost? It's turned against us. And it's leading a Gorrath battalion straight toward our flank." Seraphina's stomach twisted in knots. The sabotage had been deeper than she realized. Someone had turned their own ship against them, and now it was leading the Gorrath right to their vulnerable side. "Focus fire on that ship," she ordered. "I want it down now." The battle intensified once again. The Vanguard's guns roared, and the fleet's remaining ships turned their fire on the rogue vessel. The breach was catastrophic. Despite the damage to the enemy, humanity was taking heavy losses. A few hours later, Seraphina stood before the shattered holographic map. The aftermath was all too clear. The battle had cost them dearly, too dearly. Her fleet had taken irreparable damage, and the Gorrath were still advancing. The sabotage ship had been destroyed, but the damage was done. With their forces fractured, their resources dwindling, and the Gorrath closing in, Seraphina knew they had no choice but to regroup and strategize for a second, more desperate offensive. She turned to her crew, their faces just as weary as hers. They had lost more than they could afford, and now the fate of humanity depended on her next move. "We fight," Seraphina said, her voice resolute. "We fight until we have nothing left to fight with. And then, we fight again." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the promise of another battle. But there was no other choice. Humanity had made its stand, and now it was up to Seraphina to make sure it wasn't in vain. The galaxy was watching, and Seraphina would not let them fall without a final, devastating blow. The Vanguard shuddered under a barrage of fire. Seraphina Aldrich gripped the edge of her console, her knuckles white from the tension. Outside, the stars streaked past like distant witnesses to the chaos. The Gorrath fleet, though damaged by the surprise weapon, was not finished. They were relentless, their warships closing in with ruthless efficiency. "Commander," Riker's voice broke through the crackling calms. "We've reached the Gorrath flagship. It's enormous, heavily shielded. We'll need to split our forces to surround it." Seraphina's heart pounded in her chest. This was it. The final showdown. Humanity's last chance to stop the Gorrath's reign of terror once and for all. If they couldn't destroy the flagship, the Gorrath would complete their conquest of the galaxy. "We hit them from both sides," Seraphina ordered, her voice calm despite the storm brewing inside her. "Engage at maximum speed! Get us into position!" The crew sprang into action, executing the plan with flawless precision. The Vanguard's engines roared as it accelerated toward the flagship, weaving through the debris of destroyed ships, narrowly dodging the enemy's retaliatory fire. Seraphina's pulse quickened as she watched the Gorrath vessel grow larger in the viewport. It was an imposing sight, black, jagged, and shaped like some ancient predator, its hull covered in strange, alien markings. "Captain Aldrich, we're in position," Riker called out. "Shields are holding. We're ready." "Good," she replied, standing tall as the command center erupted with activity. "Prepare to breach their outer defenses. Make them regret underestimating humanity." The battle outside was chaos incarnate. Humanity's ships danced through the carnage, dodging fire as they tore into the enemy's hull. Seraphina's fleet was small compared to the Gorrath, but it had something the enemy didn't: human ingenuity. Every ship in the fleet was a testament to their survival. A quick, sharp blade against the Gorrath's monstrous strength. "Opening fire now!" Riker called as the Vanguard unleashed a devastating volley of energy beams. The flagship's shields flared, absorbing the attack but buckling under the pressure. The flagship retaliated, sending waves of destructive fire towards Seraphina's ship. "Steady, hold course!" Seraphina shouted to the crew. The ship rocked under the impact, but she remained calm, eyes locked on the advancing enemy. Inside, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Every officer was fully aware that this battle was more than a fight for survival. It was a chance for humanity to reclaim their place in the galaxy, to prove they could not be crushed by overwhelming odds. "Commander," Lieutenant Armitage called, his voice tight with urgency. "We've breached their defenses. The outer shields are down." "Perfect," Seraphina said, already moving to the next phase of the plan. "Time to end this." With a single motion, Seraphina activated the tactical override, sending her fleet into a frenzy of synchronized strikes. The Vanguard shifted course sharply, slamming into the breach with incredible force. Its hull groaned under the strain, but the ship held firm as they slammed through the opening. "Prepare boarding teams!" Seraphina ordered, her voice like steel. "We're taking the heart of their ship." The atmosphere inside the Vanguard grew tense as the crew braced for the assault. Seraphina's heart raced, but her mind was focused. This was the moment. Every decision, every sacrifice had led them to this. They had no choice but to win. The Gorrath flagship was unlike anything Seraphina had ever encountered. The walls pulsed with an organic glow, the air thick with a strange, unfamiliar hum. It felt alive, like the ship was a living creature rather than just a weapon of war. The hull seemed to ripple with energy as they boarded, and the crew moved with precision, weapons drawn, ready for whatever the enemy had in store. "We're inside," Riker said over the comms, his voice low. "Clear the corridors. We need to reach the command center." Seraphina nodded, signaling to her team. The crew moved through the dimly lit halls, their boots echoing off the walls. Every corner was a potential ambush, but Seraphina's nerves were as sharp as her focus. The ship had to fall, and it had to fall now. As they neared the control center, the Gorrath resistance became fiercer. Alien soldiers, towering and heavily armored, clashed with the human boarding team in a brutal firefight. The air was thick with the scent of burning plasma and the sharp sounds of weapons discharging. Seraphina moved through the chaos like a ghost, her movements quick and deadly. She could feel the adrenaline surging through her veins, but she remained focused. She had led humanity's last charge, and she would not falter now. With a final, decisive strike, Seraphina's team reached the command center. The doors slid open, revealing a massive chamber filled with alien technology, humming and buzzing in the air. At the far end, a massive screen flickered, showing Lord Vargoth, the Gorrath warlord. His cold, calculating eyes locked onto Seraphina's, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. "You're too late," Lord Vargoth's voice boomed, his alien form towering above her. "Humanity is already lost. You cannot stop me. I am the future, Seraphina's eyes burned with defiance. The future is not yours, she spat. It's ours. Without another word, she activated the self-destruct sequence on the Gorrath flagship. The countdown began, and the massive ship shuddered violently. Get out! Seraphina shouted. Now! The crew didn't hesitate. They raced toward the exit, just as explosions rocked the ship, shaking the entire structure. Lord Vargatha's roar echoed through the command center, but it was too late. The Vanguard had done its job. Seraphina and her crew barely made it back to their ship as the Gorrath flagship began to crumble. The final explosions were deafening, the destruction of the flagship a violent and beautiful testament to humanity's resilience. As the Vanguard pulled away, Seraphina took a moment to breathe, her hands still gripping the console. The tension that had plagued her for so long began to ebb away, but a bittersweet realization settled in. The war wasn't over, but this victory was a turning point. Report, she commanded, her voice steady but soft. We did it, Commander, Riker said. The flagship is gone. The Gorrath are in disarray. They're retreating. Seraphina looked out into the vastness of space. Humanity had taken one step closer to survival. But the galaxy was vast, and there were still many battles to fight. This isn't over, she said softly, a sense of finality in her words. But we've won today. As the Vanguard sailed into the stars, Seraphina Aldrich knew one thing for certain: the fight for humanity's future had only just begun. The war had ended, but the price of survival was more than Seraphina Aldrich had ever imagined. The Vanguard drifted through the emptiness of space, its hull battered and scarred, its engines struggling against the weight of countless battles fought and lost. The stars around them were distant, indifferent to the struggle that had unfolded in their midst. They were just stars, silent, cold, and unyielding. Seraphina stood at the observation deck, gazing out at the vast, uncaring universe. The Gorrath flagship was nothing more than a smoldering wreck now, drifting in the void, a reminder of the human cost of victory. The fleet had done its job, but many had fallen in the process. Crew members, officers, soldiers, all had paid the ultimate price. Commander, Riker's voice broke through her thoughts, soft but insistent. Admiral Armitage is waiting for you in the war room. He says it's urgent. Seraphina nodded, taking a final look at the stars before turning away. The weight of the command had become too much. The victories, the sacrifices, they all blurred into a heavy, suffocating fog. She didn't have the luxury of mourning yet. The people who had survived needed her more than ever. Inside the war room, the atmosphere was tense. Riker, Admiral Armitage, and the rest of the surviving crew were gathered around the central table. Maps of the galaxy still flickered on the holoscreens, showing areas that had been reclaimed, and others still under threat. The mood was solemn. There were no celebrations, no sense of relief. The war was over, but it felt like the real battle was only just beginning. Commander, Armitage said, his voice low. We've gathered what remains of the fleet. The Gorrath may be in disarray, but we can't assume they'll retreat for long. This is a brief window of opportunity. Seraphina's eyes hardened. What do you propose? We need to rebuild. We need to find a way to make sure the Gorrath, and any other threat that might follow, never come back, Armitage said, his eyes filled with the same weariness she felt. But we also need to heal. The losses we've taken, it's more than just ships and soldiers. The fabric of humanity has been torn. We need to address that before we can move forward. Seraphina exhaled slowly, letting his words sink in. She had seen the devastation firsthand. The battlefield had left its mark not only on their bodies, but on their souls. The survivors would carry the scars of this war for the rest of their lives. Agreed, Seraphina replied, her voice firm. But we also need to find a way to unite. Not just our forces, but every last human out there. If we don't, the Gorrath, or anyone else who comes next, will tear us apart. We've seen what happens when we are divided. A murmur of agreement passed through the room. The war had shown them that survival was no longer just about weapons and tactics. It was about unity, solidarity, and the will to rebuild from nothing. But how? Riker asked, his brow furrowed. How do we rebuild a shattered civilization? Seraphina didn't have an easy answer. The question had plagued her since the final strike against the Gorrath. Rebuilding a civilization was never simple, especially when the foundations had been obliterated. But she knew the first step. It started with trust. We start by reaching out, Seraphina said. We find the scattered colonies, the survivors hiding in the dark corners of space. We offer them something more than just safety. We offer them hope. And we do it together. She turned toward the tactical map, the display flickering as it zoomed in on the fragmented human settlements across the galaxy. Each flicker represented a remnant of humanity, a colony, a military outpost, a city now a shadow of what it once was. We can't do this alone, Seraphina continued. We've seen what happens when we're isolated. We need a united front, everyone working toward the same goal. And that begins with us. Later that evening, Seraphina found herself alone in her quarters, staring at the medals and awards that lined her walls. They were a reminder of her victories, but also of the cost they had come with. Each medal had a name, a face, a story attached to it. And every one of those people had given something precious, sometimes everything, so that humanity could survive. The door slid open, and Riker stepped in, holding a datapad. He looked different than he had before. There was a weariness in his eyes that hadn't been there during the height of the battle. His once confident posture had sagged with the weight of their losses. Seraphina, he said quietly, his voice hesitant. I just wanted to check in. I know we've all been pushing hard, but I wanted to make sure you're okay. Seraphina didn't look at him immediately. She couldn't afford to let her guard down, not yet. I'm fine. Riker paused, then placed the datapad on her desk. I've compiled a report on the state of the fleet. But there's something else I think you should see. She turned toward the datapad, and as the screen lit up, images began to flicker across it, images of the survivors, the families, the children that had lived through the war and were now beginning to rebuild. Faces of men and women who had been torn apart by the Gorrath but were still standing, still moving forward. Look, Riker said softly. We've lost so much. But they're still here. And they're looking to us. Seraphina looked at the faces on the screen, her heart tightening as she saw the hope in their eyes, the determination that mirrored her own. It was strange. After everything they had endured, there was still life, still purpose in their eyes. For the first time since the final battle, a small spark of warmth flickered inside Seraphina. She looked up at Riker, meeting his gaze. We can rebuild, she said quietly, her voice steady. Not just the fleet, but everything. We can make sure humanity survives, not as broken pieces, but as something whole. Riker nodded, his expression softening. Together, he said. The days that followed were filled with the hard work of rebuilding. The fleet, though battered, would live on as a symbol of humanity's resilience. New alliances were formed, not just with the surviving colonies, but with other races that had been watching from the shadows. Humanity, once a scattered group of warring factions, was beginning to pull itself back together. Seraphina stood at the helm of the vanguard, watching as the stars streaked past them once more. This time, there was a sense of calm in the air, as if the storm had passed. But deep down, Seraphina knew that the real work was just beginning. The galaxy was vast, and many threats still loomed on the horizon. But humanity had shown what it could endure. And now, it was time to rebuild not just the ships and cities, but their very spirit. Let's go home, Seraphina said softly, her voice filled with quiet resolve. As the vanguard charted its course through the stars, humanity's story was far from over. But for the first time in years, there was hope on the horizon. And Seraphina Aldrich would be there, leading them forward, one step at a time.